Thanks for joining me again. This is Danny Cardwell from ThoughtWrestler.blogspot.com, and I want to start with a passage from Jean Paul Sartre, and it reads as follows. I rule the space around me, but when my environment is intruded upon by another person, I have to share it with this other in an indeterminate manner. The freedom of the other destabilizes my own freedom, and it disintegrates the preconceptions I had previously existed in. As a human being, I naturally tend to objectify the world around me, but I must also presume that the other also objectifies the world as well, including me in it. I have now become an object in the other's vision, and because I realize this innately, I have become an object even in my own opinion. I am imprisoned in the other's vision, and therefore pass judgment on myself as a mere object. This causes a shameful feeling similar to if you were to spy through a keyhole and become surprised to see another eyeball staring back at you. If you privately do something as natural as pick your own nose, for example, and come to realize that someone was watching you the whole time, you are inevitably reduced to shame. In the last few weeks, domestic violence has been in the headlines, and I've always taken a stance on the mistreatment of women. I feel like male patriarchy is built on cowardice. In my personal opinion, I think it's a group of beta males looking to control anyone, and the idea that the fairer sex, so to speak, or the weaker female is someone to be conquered and controlled is something as old as the beginning of time. Whether or not a person chooses to engage in that kind of behavior is something I think that is a much more conscious decision to be made. The signs of male patriarchy are all around us in our society, and yet we tend to overlook them or undervalue the role they play in the lives of women. And when I think about, from the earliest age of development, you think about a Barbie doll. Now I'm almost certain that a man came up with the figure and shape of the Barbie doll. No woman, or I could be dead wrong, but it's hard for me to believe that a woman came up with that shape for a doll for a daughter to play with. And so, from the earliest of ages, women are taught to be objectified, and that some of their value as a person is based solely on their physical attributes and their physical beauty. And this kind of behavior escalates throughout adulthood, and I see it often when I look back on my childhood and I see the way, teenagers were marketed to, but more specifically, the way women are marketed to, and young girls. You look at the lingerie ads, you look at the fashions. I mean, I think yoga pants are a prime example of that. In the last, 5-10 years, we've convinced women that the tighter the clothing, the better it is. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they've bought into this. And now how does all of this tie to domestic violence? Well, if you start out from the position that you are an object and that you're an object to be observed, then the leap from being an object to be observed to an object to be controlled isn't that far. I feel for women. A lot of times I've had people tell me, as far as the struggle for equality, that these movements should remain separate. I've heard scholars and intellectuals say that the movement for black equality and freedom is a separate struggle from women's liberation or from the rights of gay and lesbian community. And some of their arguments for that are persuasive, but I choose to engage in all paths and all pursuits of freedom. There's no struggle that's too small. There's no people that are too separate from who I am, whose struggle I can't engage in and get around. My mother, my sister, my wife, my mother-in-law, the women in my family, two of my best friends in this world are women. So to know that they have a struggle and that I would do nothing to help them because I'm so engaged in my own struggle, for me it just seems shallow, and it seems like I could do more with my time. So I choose to engage in this kind of dialogue, and I choose to support women. And, if you choose not to, that's fine. That's a decision that you have to make. But for me, all of these struggles are connecting dots, and they're not separate from each other. But to go back to Sartre, and what he was trying to say is that all of us are susceptible to these kinds of feelings. All of us can be viewed through the eyes of the other. But what has happened is that we live in a society in which power has become married with male patriarchy, pigmentation, and there are outward signs of power that don't even have to be exercised to be put in place. Women have to work that much harder in some instances to prove their intelligence in ways that men oftentimes do not. And that's a real thing. I mean, doesn't always happen, but that happens enough for it to be something to be considered. And so, in light of all of the domestic violence in the NFL and around other entertainment, Chris Brown, you see women, prominent women, and women who, in other outwardly appearances would have the ability to separate themselves from the abuse, and yet they're even abused. So when you see a young lady who is abused, in the case of, Janae Rice, well, I mean, Ray has earning power that she does not. And some women choose to stay for the economic reasons. Some women stay because the abuse is so violent and it's so psychologically damaging that to escape would be almost a miraculous act, that they can't will themselves to leave the situation. And that sort of mental distress is something that also needs to be looked at. So I support my women. I support all women. I support their move for equality, and I stand against domestic violence. I'm 6'1", 240 pounds. I have friends that are much larger than me, and we were in situations where if someone wanted to fight, you could fight every day. And what I've noticed is that some of the cowards who act out towards women, when put in a situation where they can exert their physical force and they can fight on a daily basis, they choose not to. And so the cowardice behind it is what really affects me in a way. It makes me, I don't want to use too strong a word, but it makes me look completely down on these men that would engage in this behavior. Like I said, I can't beat everyone up. I'm 6'1", 240 pounds. I will put up a better fight than most of your wives. Leaving room for the MMA girls. They're just amazing. But, to get back to the point, women have been systematically subjected to the control of men, whether it's, physical or whether it's psychologically, whether it's the way we market to them, advertise to them, and project our fantasies upon them. And so to unravel this would take another couple generations. I mean, some women have done much better jobs with this than others, but we have women that are suffering with this. So it's not a man's place to say that these things aren't real, and it's not a man's place to argue for them. But what I will say is that I do stand behind and support all of our women of all colors, all nationalities, and all races. That's my thoughts. Danny Cardwell, ThoughtWrestler.blogspot.com. Peace.